acknowledgement that I have done a wrong, I have a debt to pay, and I can improve to become a better member of society. It begins with remorse. Without remorse, there is no rehabilitation. Without remorse, without rehabilitation, you have recidivism. This man, no, I'm sorry, this defendant wanted to kill someone. He joined the Marines, specifically the infantry. He wanted to kill someone. He was given a target on a silver platter. He was given an address, a date, a time, and he planned it. Because he knew that if he planned it just enough, he would never get caught. He planned it so much that he thought, well, even when I got caught, I got this. I can still get out of this. Without remorse, without rehabilitation, any person that goes through that effort to commit a murder would absolutely do it again to see if they could. You're left with either two options. Either he is a weak, easily manipulated man who would kill anybody that anyone asked him to, or he's not a weak and easily manipulated man. And if that's the case, then he absolutely would do this again to see if he's smart enough this time, to see if he can beat it this time, because he has shown no respect for the law of this courtroom. The only thing that I will say about this situation overall is that all of these men did nothing but use my sister. John Mello used her to create a whole new family when he had a wife and children already. Brad Post used her. This defendant used her. All of them used her for their own twisted personal gratification. He would do it again. Without remorse, without rehabilitation, you will have recidivism. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, ma'am. Anybody else in the second? Okay. Defense.
Your Honor, may it please the court, Your Honor's presiding over this trial. Your Honor is aware of the evidence that was presented at the trial. Your Honor is also aware of the evidence that was proffered. We do believe that could go to mitigation, so we would ask Your Honor to consider that very carefully. Zach has no prior criminal history, and he stands ready for sentencing. Your Honor, I would ask for Mr. David Hughes, Zach's father, to have the opportunity to address the court briefly.
Just stand right there.
Thank you, Your Honor, for the opportunity to speak a few words on my son's behalf. The trial is over. A verdict's been rendered, and we accept that. But what I want to speak to, because I understand this is the sentencing phase of the trial, where you have some parameter of your sentence. My son is probably, in my lifetime, and I've run into some pretty amazing people, and this is going to be seen as a bias from the father, but he has got such a strong moral compass and fortitude and desire for the truth in his life than really anyone I've ever met. He actually eclipses a lot of those things that I aspire to myself. It's what makes his music so incredibly meaningful, because as a musician, and there are some world-class musicians sitting here today, colleagues of Zach's, what makes a musician's art come through is what's the essence of who they are. It's not something you can fake. When you hear it, you know it's a fake. When you hear music that causes people in a room to weep, you know it's coming from something inside that person that you cannot describe. Zach was not born with a silver spoon in his mouth. I want to tell you that. I taught all my children, Zach being the oldest, the value of hard work. He might have been the only person at Juilliard to show up without manicured fingernails and calluses instead. He worked hard. I pushed him hard. Fathers and parents tend to do that with their firstborn child. And maybe I pushed him, a little hard at times, but it made him the man he is today. I want to address something, and Mr. Wilkins?
I got to just address the
That Zach is a cold-blooded killer. I am sorry. Zach wrote his mother and I a letter delivered to us through his attorneys approximately a month ago. In that letter, he described basically what he did in that chair over there, only in a little more detail. Why he did what he had to do, what he felt he had to do. You heard him say in that chair, he wasn't going to go on a cruise ship to Bora Bora, where he was headed, and look at himself in the mirror at night after playing beautiful classical music for rich people. He couldn't do that. Zach has been brutally honest in his life. So much, sometimes to the detriment of his own career. Everybody in the piano world wants to be a soloist with an orchestra. But it's a very small amount of room on the head of that pin, and that's where he was headed. But he had people in his life, donors, rich benefactors, who made demands of him artistically in exchange for their financial benefit, and he walked away from it to the detriment of his own career. Why do I bring that up? He has such a strong moral compass and a desire for the truth that sometimes he actually hurts himself. His friends here, all these people in this courtroom for the last 2 weeks have been here day in, day out, some as far as from Seattle, Washington. They're here because they grew up with Zach in the music world, and they saw something in him they didn't see in anybody else. He's got a loyal circle of friends that I never had. I told my kids when they grew up, if you, at the end of your life, you end up with 2 or 3 people in your hand that are really there for you, that's the guy I want in the foxhole with me. Consider yourself lucky. Zach's got a dozen of those. Why? Bettina, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm not supposed to mention her name. I'm sorry. But I want you to know, Zach had felt compelled to do what he did because of what he would quote Edmund Burke on this. The only thing necessary for evil to prosper is for good men to do nothing. Okay. his desire for the truth and his truthful telling of what happened. I mean, he sat there and he didn't hold anything back that would benefit his portrayal to this court. He's just as brutally honest with himself as he is with other people. He has no criminal record whatsoever before this event. The only thing I know of is an outstanding traffic ticket in Italy somehow he rang up when he was there with Mello. And several of the guards in the detention center, where he's been for 3 years, he's been an exemplary inmate, have told him that they were going to come to this trial to support him. When you gain the silent respect of law enforcement officers, they see something in you, they see it all. And they see a guy that's respectful for 3 years without a single incident. I think that counts for something. So I'm just here, I'll wrap it up. As you determine your sentencing, I would ask you to consider what type of man he is. And take that into consideration. I love my son. I'm proud of my son. Thank you, Your Honor.
Anything else from the state?
No, Your Honor. Your Honor, just for the purpose of the record, I don't. Would Your Honor want to inquire Zach as to whether or not he wishes to speak?
That is up to you. I'm sorry, I thought that you had indicated that.
He does not wish to speak. I just want to put that on the record.
Okay. Zachary David Hughes, indictment 2022 GS 2302194, indictment for murder. You're to be committed to the State Department of Corrections for life. Indictment 2022 GS 2302194. You're to be committed to the South Carolina Department of Corrections for 5 years. That is to run concurrent. Indictment 24 GS 2305425A for burglary first degree to run concurrent is for you to be committed to the South Carolina Department of Corrections for life. The other two indictments, 2024 GS 2305413 for conspiracy to commit harassment second degree is 30 days time served. Indictment 2024 GS 2305412, harassment second degree, 30 days time served. dismissed.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. The judge in the killing on Canebrake murder trial has now issued a life sentence against the suspect, Zachary Hughes. So you heard that Zachary Hughes has now been sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Christina Parcell. We're joined still by legal analyst Kim Varner, Grant Varner. Kim, let's begin with you. We didn't hear much from the judge at all. We heard from Christina Parcell's sister with a passionate plea to the judge. We heard from Zachary Hughes' father in his address to the judge, oftentimes addressing others in the courtroom, but ultimately the judge sentenced Zachary Hughes to life in prison. Let's get your reaction initially to the sentencing. Any surprise at all?
None whatsoever. During the break, Grant and I thought he was going to get life because he is not an accused killer anymore. He is a convicted beyond any reasonable doubt murderer of a very brutal murder. We fully expected, Grant and I both did, that he would get life without any question.
Grant, are you surprised at all the judge didn't address Zachary Hughes at any point? Because so often so many people kind of go back to the Murdaugh trial, where we heard from Judge Clifton Newman. He gave a long spiel to Alec Murdaugh in his sentencing and addressed him directly. We didn't see that here with this judge. He just issued that sentencing and then moved on.
You know, I think the difference here is Murdaugh's sentencing took place totally different time of day. There was a delay between verdict and sentencing. Clifton Newman had plenty of time to think about what he wanted to say, and then Alec Murdaugh did choose to address the judge himself, whereas Zachary Hughes tonight did not. So I don't find it terribly surprising. You're at the end of a 2-week trial. The jury has been dismissed. Everybody is tired. We heard from 2 impact statements total. I'm not surprised at all. Judge Fenn handed down the sentence, and good night to everybody. That's not very surprising.
Okay. You mentioned those victim impact statements. We heard from Zachary Hughes' father. Were you surprised to hear from the father in his plea to the court?
No, not at all. I have no idea what it feels like to have your son called a convicted murderer and then to have to speak immediately after the impact of that hits you. I understand his emotions. And, I heard him talking, and he was proud of what his son became. The problem with that is what people hear is, your son became a convicted murderer. And I made the statement that what he was doing was the same thing as trying to fill up the Grand Canyon with a Dixie cup. It's not going to make any difference. The fact that he has high morals, well, the answer to that is, then why did he murder somebody? That he was an accomplished pianist who had a big circle of friends. Where were those friends when he had these thoughts or when he acted out on that? There's so many answers to it. I feel sorry for the man. I hate that he's in this situation. But the facts are his son was convicted of murder, and nothing's going to change that. I respect the fact further. He's a very intelligent man who speaks very well. And I could understand if Zachary were not very bright or didn't understand the consequences. He's a very intelligent young man who has a very intelligent father, and of all people, he should have known better. That works against you to a certain extent.
We also heard from Christina Parcell's sister, Tina, and this is the second day in a row we actually heard from her because she spoke last night at a bond court for John Mello. What stuck out to you, Grant, about what she said in that victim impact statement? We did hear her even mentioned about her niece now being in Child Protective Services, so that answers a question for a lot of people who are wondering what happens to the daughter, who's truly the victim in all of this.
Well, you're absolutely correct, Tori. The daughter here is the one who has suffered the most, without question. Okay. I think her victim impact statement was a very passionate plea to the judge. She has obviously been very moved by this crime, and not in a good way. Also, you kind of have to balance what the accusations are here. And it's very clear that she feels very strongly her sister was put up to this or manipulated by all these men around her into what she was accused of doing. Now, she'll obviously never face trial for that. She'll never have to answer to those accusations, and we may never know whether or not she is truly guilty of what she stands accused of in multiple other court filings. But the sister, without question, will carry a torch to the day she dies for everybody involved in this case, including John Mello, Bradley Post, and certainly Zachary Hughes.
And Kim, it's one of those things where we're waiting to see if we're able to hear from the prosecution or the defense. We know that court is out. Judge has handed down a life sentence to Zachary Hughes, the suspect in the Canebrake killing in the murder trial here that we've been following closely. I think what happens next now? You mentioned where you had those conversations with the defendant. They're in the room for that 15-minute break before sentencing, but now that sentencing has been handed down. He has been convicted of murder. He has now been sentenced to serve life in prison here at this point. What are you saying to your client? What are those conversations like?
Part of it is this, and to make sure you're correct, I heard he was sentenced to 2 life sentences.
Yep.
Okay, so he's 2.
Life on the burglary, life on
and
murder.
I mean, part of what you sit down and tell your client is, do you understand what you got? Do you know what that means? Whether you're eligible for parole or will ever be eligible for parole, or does that mean you go out on a gurney? That's a legitimate question the defendant's going to have. And then you talk about the immediate things. Anything we need to do, it could be as silly as, give your car keys to your sister out there, to who do you need to contact, who do you need to reach out to, what do you need to do. We have a right to an appeal, and you explain the appellate process. Unfortunately, one of the things lawyers are going to talk to you about is, how are you going to come up with the money? Who do we need to call? I mean, those are all practical things, and you explain to him how long this could take. You tell him repeatedly, keep your mouth shut. Do not talk about this, because you don't know who's listening, you don't know who your cellmate is, what they will tell, and it doesn't matter what you say, they could twist it or turn it. Everyone has the right to remain silent. Smart people have the ability to remain silent because the appeal is still pending. You're not to talk about this case, you're not to discuss it, do not express any dissatisfaction, just go back, eat your meal, and talk about the weather. I mean, these are important points that you have to get across.
Now, when it comes to the timing of all of this, we got the verdict not too long ago. The sentencing happened rather fast. We're actually going to take you live out to the courthouse. The defense is speaking now.
The jury reached a verdict. The judge sentenced Mr. Hughes, and we're going to appeal. And that's our comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, that simple there from the defense saying they are going to appeal. So they were walking out of the courtroom there, making it clear that is their plan now. They recap saying that Zachary Hughes has been found guilty of murder in the Canebrake killing. He has also been sentenced to life in prison, and now his defense team plans to appeal. So Grant, what does that look like?
Well, they're going to begin the process of notifying the courts that they want to file the appeal. So they'll file a notice of appeal. They will also go ahead and request the transcripts. Now, this is...
All right, let's go and cut you off here. Now we're hearing from the prosecutors. Let's listen in.
It's been a long, hard fought 2 weeks. A lot of fights in the battle, in the courtroom. A lot of battles in the courtroom. I'm very tired. But really, this case is about Christina Parcell. She was brutally murdered by Zach Hughes, and we proved it. And this was a very emotional trial because you rarely have a defendant get on the stand and detail such a heinous crime on a justification that makes no sense. And that was very emotional for us, very emotional for the jurors, very emotional for the courtroom. And we're just glad that this jury did what they did, and they got some sort of justice for Christina and her family, especially her sister, Tina Parcell, who's been through so much. And Tina said it so well. She said it better than anybody could in the courtroom about the impact this has had on her and her life and what he did to her sister. So we hope that this gives them some solace, some justice, a sense of healing in which they can move on. But there's no winners today. Everybody lost something in that courtroom today. And that's very sad. However, my duty is to make sure that this county is safe and the people are safe from people that commit crimes like Zach Hughes. And today we accomplished that feat.
Well, the defense also just made a statement that saying they're going to appeal. This case has been read into the record several times. There was a lot of proffers, a lot of testimony without the jury in place. Do you believe that appeal will move forward?
You know, after 2 weeks of trial, I'm sure there are some appealable issues. But I'll tell you this, the judge did an excellent job analyzing the law. We were very deep in analyzing the law. My co-counsel, Jake Hallfirth, did a fantastic job digging in and analyzing complex legal issues all along the way. The defense attorneys did an excellent job protecting the record. And so everything is protected. Everything is going to be ready for the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court to review. And, of course, we will take whatever analysis they take. But I feel that the prosecution put together a very strong, clean, legally clean case.
You know, well, they say that trials are a search for the truth. Do you think the jury got that today or during this trial?
I think so. I think they got it in a very emotional way. And I think I think it was very difficult for them to listen to the kind of testimony that they had. To listen to my closing statement was hard. To listen to the violence and the deprivation that Christina Parcell suffered was very hard. And there's a lot of other avenues involved in this trial. But for this trial, it was about Zach Hughes murdering Christina Parcell. That's what the trial was about the entire time. And that's what we kept this trial to. And that was the jury's decision to determine whether Zach Hughes, with malice aforethought, killed Christina Parcell, and they found that he did.
But do you think that the verdict would have been any different had they heard about the child porn and the charges that Bradley Post was facing?
I don't think they will ever hear about that, because the relevance of any of that, and as you heard Tina Parcell described, John Mello has done so much to Christina Parcell. Brad Hughes has done so much to Christina Parcell. And Zach Hughes did the ultimate thing to Christina Parcell.
Now, the defense mentioned a couple of times they didn't believe enough evidence was presented by you guys in the case. What were your thoughts when they kept saying that?
You know, that's what they're supposed to say. They got to represent their client. They got to zealously represent their client. They had a very difficult defense to pursue. And it was sort of a novel defense based on the exclusion of a lot of evidence. And I believe they did the best they could.
And while you said in your closing statement that you yourself didn't expect Zach Hughes to take the stand in the way he did, talk us through what was going through your mind as the solicitor. Take us through that process as you hear Zach explaining what detail, step by step, what he did that day.
Yeah. The only time I've had a person explain a violent murder was in one of the first trials that I had, and that person admitted to it, pled guilty to it, and then described what her co-defendant was doing. And it was hard, and it was gruesome. But I've never had a defendant get on the stand with the kind of attitude, ego, cold-faced sternness, and explain a brutally murder in the way that he did. It shook me a little bit, his testimony, I'm not going to lie. My legal mind was analyzing everything, what he was saying and what he was doing. So the professional side of me was in a little bit of shock as well, because it didn't make a lot of sense to me, because he was giving the prosecution so much to work with. It's my understanding, based on what he said, he was giving me the truth that was in his head. at the time.
But you could have crossed him for as long as you wanted to.
Certainly.
But you only asked him one question.
Certainly.
And why did you ask him that question?
That was a strategic decision, a very much strategic decision. And as you know, he couldn't follow the rules inside the courtroom. And so he wasn't going to follow the rules with me either. And he wanted to have a moment of conversation with me. There was no doubt about it. And I felt that he wanted to say what he wanted to say, and if it meant potentially getting convicted, he was willing to do that. And if that was the exchange for me not being able to cross-examine him, because I had a lot of cross-examination, we could have gone on for days, the cross-examinations that I wanted to ask him. But that was not my goal. My goal was not to go face-to-face with Zach Hughes. That's not my job. My job is to sustain convictions, keep the people of Greenville County safe, and protect victims, and get them some justice. And so I made a strategic decision to do just that.
During sentencing, we heard some pretty emotional statements from the sister of Christina Parcell and also from the father of Zachary Hughes. Can you describe your emotions as you heard those statements being spoken in the courtroom?
I thought Tina Parcell did a fantastic job explaining the impact that this has had on her life. It has been a major impact to her. I think we forget about her niece, who has been very impacted by all of this stuff. I think she's now 12 or 13 years old, so she suffered a lot in her very young age. And I'm not going to comment on the comments made by Zach Hughes' father.
What about Mr. Mello now? Do you need Zach Hughes to prosecute Mr. Mello?
Well, I have his testimony. So I already have Zach Hughes. He has already stated under oath certain things that Mr. Mello did in relation to the murder of Christina Parcell. And so Mr. Mello has been charged with solicitation of a felony and accessory before the fact of murder. And we will be continuing to build that case and start preparing it for trial.
There was a lot of objections going on during the trial, trying to just keep it towards the judge's ruling. What was that like for the prosecutors to just kind of keep the ball rolling during the trial?
Certainly. The judge makes rulings. The judge decides what can and can't be heard by a jury, because his role is to find or to have a fair trial. And that is what his role is, and that's what he did. And so he has to make legal rulings that are sometimes difficult, and the defense and the prosecution have to adhere to those rulings. Those are the rules that I live under in that courtroom. But we also have to monitor each other and make sure when they violate those rules, or they attempt to violate those rules, or might go violate those rules, then we have to object, and they get to object too, and then the judge has to make those rulings, and we went along. When there's a lot of objections going on, oftentimes makes it difficult, keep you off your feet a little bit, but that's just part of the way the courtroom works, and that's what we're trained to do.
So what would you say to somebody that, or people that might be thinking that you kind of hit the ball a little bit?
Oh, we didn't have the ball at all. There's no hiding the ball. If you want to talk about excluded evidence, it was excluded for a reason, and there was a really good reason to exclude that, because it had nothing to do with this trial. Now, the defendant may have wanted it to be something in this trial, but it had no business in this trial because it was not related to this trial, and that's what the judge ruled, that it was not relevant. And they don't know what that evidence is, and they don't know the full story of all of that evidence. Now, as you all very know, Brad Post has been charged with a multitude of crimes, and he's being prosecuted by the Attorney General's office, and they will continue to prosecute Brad Post for those crimes.
Do you believe if that was introduced and his outbursts, do you believe that that testimony could be used against Brad Post if that had been entered into testimony today?
The information about Brad Post?
Yes, the information about the child porn and the alleged sexual abuse.
And I can't answer that question because it was not introduced in this trial. And those are crimes that Brad Post is going to have to stand for.
So why aren't you prosecuting Brad Post?
The Attorney General's office typically prosecutes around the state child pornography cases. And those are the kind of crimes that Brad Post has been charged with. And so they prosecute those in South Carolina, those in Greenville all the time. In addition, I was prosecuting Zach Hughes, so it just made it easier that he was prosecuting Brad Post. They're two totally separate cases.
So part of the reason that Zach Hughes said that he murdered Christina was he attempted to get investigators to look into her case.
Yeah.
Do you feel the system failed in some way, and that's why we're here?
Absolutely not. There were multiple investigations into these families, and there are lots of other ways in which to report alleged crimes, to try to do things in an effort to protect children. But I know one way that you're not supposed to do it, and that's to break into their house and stab them 35 times. And so the sort of sense of vigilante justice that Zach Hughes discussed on the stand just isn't allowed in South Carolina or the country. And we're not going to stand for it here. And if you engage in that, we're going to prosecute you to the full extent of the law.
Mr. Wilkins, Lutina said last night that Christina always thought this may happen to her. Is there anything that the Solicitor's Office or Greenville County Sheriff's Office could have done maybe to have prevented this from happening to Christina Parcell?
Not that I'm aware. You heard the premeditation involved in this particular murder. Without prior knowledge of it, they were very scared of John Mello, and they've said that, but they didn't know Zach Hughes existed. They believed that John Mello was in Italy, and he was, but they didn't know he had a co-conspirator here lying in waiting. I'm not sure how you defend against that.
Is there anything that you wanted to say that we didn't ask you?
You always ask me that question. It's a hard question to answer, other that I think the justice system worked today. I think trials are supposed to be hard and long. The state is supposed to be challenged by the defense, and then you proceed forward, and then the result is what the result is. And I think the right result was done today, and we're satisfied with it.
I do have one more question. We heard on the stand that basically we're looking at all of the images, and at some point there were so many they stopped looking. Will your office continue to look and identify victims in these images?
That has already been done by the Crimes Against Children unit at the Sheriff's Department. They always continue to do that, and that is directly related to Brad Post's case.
And well, is your office going to be involved at all in the daughter's, well-being from this point forward?
Sure. So our office doesn't have anything to do with that. That'll be Department of Social Services, Family Court. I believe Tina Parcell mentioned that they've already got hearings and those types of things scheduled. But fortunately for me, that is outside the scope of my authority in my realm, and I'm just fine about that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
All right, we just heard from the prosecutor there in the Killing and Canebrake murder trial, and we also heard from the defense simply saying they are going to appeal. But we heard a lot from the prosecutor there. We are still joined by our legal analyst, Kim Varner, Grant Varner. Grant, let's begin with you. We heard a lot from the prosecutor. What were some of your biggest takeaways? Drew a lot of reaction there as he was speaking.
It was interesting to me the points he chose to address and the points he chose not to address, although to some degree, what do you say to the stuff he didn't address? He didn't want to discuss Zach Hughes' father's commentary during the impact statements. I don't know what Solicitor Wilkins could say to that, it's an impossible situation. He's absolutely correct. His office will have nothing to do with the daughter at this point in time, Ms. Parcel's daughter. He's correct that the Attorney General's office is going to pursue the crimes against Bradley Post. So whatever accusations are proven true, they're going to be addressed by the Attorney General's office going forward. I'm quite positive that Solicitor Wilkins is glad to be finished with this case. This was a long, hard-fought case. I have no doubt about that. And, you know, I commend him for recognizing the job that defense counsel did there. Quite often, people walk out and they are less than friendly. It's a very chilled relationship. But the Greenville County Bar in upstate South Carolina, we go in there, we put it on the line, we will fight hard in the courtroom when we walk out. It's nice to be part of the upstate bar where we recognize the other side actually did a commendable job. So I appreciate him doing that. It makes me think highly of him in this situation. And, you know, we certainly saw defense counsel come out, Andy Mormon, very short, concise, to the point we're going to appeal. I think they have a lot of discussion ahead of them about what path they're going to take, and I have no doubt that probably either later tonight or first thing in the morning, they're going to start going through their notes looking for the appealable issues. And I agree with Solicitor Wilkins on this aspect too. This will probably be heard by the appellate court and the Supreme Court of South Carolina. It would not shock me if this doesn't make it all the way to the, or it would not shock me if it makes it all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. There were a lot of interesting issues here. But as Kim said earlier, they're going to have to show abuse of discretion by the presiding judge to get to a lot of those. And I don't know if it'll make it that far.
Well, even the prosecutor admitted, he said, well, it was a 2-week trial. There could be plenty of things to appeal. So how, as a defense team, are you going to pinpoint exactly what you want to appeal?
Well, the easy ones are what should have been excluded and what shouldn't have been excluded. You know, obviously defense counsel argued it all matters. And I disagree to some extent with Solicitor Wilkins that it was irrelevant. The judge deemed it irrelevant. But juries tend to want to hear it all. Juries are intelligent, okay? And if all of that information had been presented to them, I can't sit here and tell you with any reasonable degree of certainty that they wouldn't have convicted Zachary Hughes in light of knowing everything that was kept from them. So it's going to be interesting, but that's the easiest one for appellate issues. What was irrelevant and what was relevant to be heard?
And Kim, something else too, the prosecutor gave us some insight in his strategy there to just ask Zachary Hughes one question. When he was able to have that cross-examination, he said, well, he didn't follow the rules with the defense, he wouldn't follow the rules with me, and he strategically had that one question. That was interesting. Did that stand out? And what else stood out to you with what the prosecution had to say?
That did stand out because you have to recognize the defendant was not going to follow the rules. He was going to blurt out whatever he thought was appropriate. And he's not a dumb guy. He's very intelligent in some of his decisions. You know, he might be crazy, but he's not stupid. And to engage him, you're gonna have the argument made again. You open the door by the question you ask. Why take that risk? Why? I said last night that I thought the solicitor would question him, but I thought he'd be short, sweet, and to the point. It was a little shorter than I expected, but it didn't surprise me whatsoever that that was their strategy move. I think it was obviously, it worked, and I think it was a wise move and decision ahead of time. The other thing that stood out, a reporter asked the question, I don't know who it was, of did the system fail this family? And he alluded to none of this was true to a certain extent. He didn't say that. But, you know, being a lawyer, the first thing I thought was, well, if none of it was true, then why did you worry about it coming out? You could have dismissed all of it. And I think, you know, I understand the Constitution. I understand the limitations on police power. I understand many times accusations are made for vengeful or spiteful reasons with no basis. It's really hard, but there was one easy thing that could have been done. The minute these allegations were made, you take that child, because she was like 8 or 9 years old at the time, take her to the Julie Valentine Center and question her. If you feel she has made a statement or something is damaging her, you get the phone records, which is what they did in the murder case, but you get them long before the murder happened. And I'm not blaming Solicitor Wilkins. That's not his job. It has not reached his desk at that stage, but it could have been done a lot better. It could have been done a lot sooner, and quite possibly it could have prevented a murder. Protecting children is most important.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And as things wrap up here, and this has been years in the making since October of 2021, we finally have that verdict, that life sentence for Zachary Hughes being charged with murder. I guess overall thoughts to wrap things up after nearly 4 years of waiting for this trial.
Grant, final thoughts.
You know, 2 life sentences, 5 years, 2 30-day time served sentences, and 6 months for contempt of court. I don't know what else there is to say at the end of that trial. I mean, that's it.
Going away for a long time.
He's going. You're going to see him go down the road. He'll be evaluated and sent to a prison. And you know, just like Alec Murdoch's case, have we heard the end of Zachary Hughes? I don't think so. He has excellent defense counsel. They will, without question, file appeals. I don't know if it'll get as much traction as some other appeals we've discussed here on air before, but I don't think it's the end of Zachary Hughes, but I think it's the end of Zachary Hughes certainly for an extended period of time at this point.
You called it, Kim, is that they were asking, we had asked you if they would call Zachary Hughes to the stand when it comes to the charges against John Mello or Bradley Post. You said he doesn't need to, they have the testimony. It's exactly what the prosecutor said today. So, as you mentioned, Grant, likely we will hear from Zachary Hughes again in some form or fashion. But Kim, when it comes to the final thoughts here tonight, with this trial, the killing on Canebrake murder trial coming to a close.
What happens to that poor little girl from here? Number 2, whether you agree or disagree with the way the case was handled or the way the jury reached its verdict, you cannot take the law into your own hands. You do not go and viciously murder somebody just because you think they did something or you know they did something. That's not within our power. That's not what you do in a civilized society. And if he had made complaints and it wasn't acted on, there are other avenues. He's a very bright man. He could have been on a letter writing campaign, knocking on doors. There are victims advocate places all over the place. He could have been knocking on the Julie Valentine store. They're there. That's what they're there for, and they're more than willing to help. You cannot be your own judge, jury, and executioner and take the law in your own hands. That's not going to be allowed. Not here, not anywhere in a civilized society.
Yeah. The Varners, thank you for joining us throughout the last 2 weeks of this intense trial. Back and forth, a lot to talk about. And I know we'll have continuing coverage of today's final results from the courtroom tonight at 10.
That's right. The Varners will be back with us here tonight. We thank you so much for your time. As always, we thank you for joining us as well. This continues to put a close on the killing and Canebrake murder trial. Zachary Hughes found guilty of murder, sentenced to life in prison. We'll have much more coverage coming up tonight on the 10 o'clock news. We'll see you then.